Well, good morning and welcome to City Hall here. It's Friday, the 28th, is that correct? 21st. Okay, I'm a week ahead of time. Oh, here comes Mr. Constant. Anyway, we'll officially gavel this in here and he can take over in just a minute. We're going to start with taking the roll, if you would like, Madam Clerk. See if we have a quorum.
Miss Allard, Mr. Constant.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Cross,
Here.
Mr. Dunbar, I believe is.
Excused, he's
yeah,
got
he's
guard.
excused. Miss LaFrance is on her way.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Mr. Presberdia, Mr. Peterson,
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson,
Here.
Mr. Rivera,
Present.
Mr. Solt,
He's
Mr.
excused.
Voland, Mr. Solt's excused, Mr. Voland, and Miss Zalatal.
Here. I am. Yep, and we'll just go through and do our introductions. So Courtney Peterson, Director of Office of Management and Budget.
Marilyn Bonzoff, Office of Management and Budget.
Amy Demboski, Municipal Manager.
Jamie Acton, Public Transportation Department Director.
And Amanda Bogine, Public Transportation Finance Manager.
Fantastic. Go ahead and begin. We've got several hours of this today.
And we will try to keep on schedule again like we did. Hopefully we don't use up the 4 hours we have today. It is only noticed from 11 to 3 today. So hopefully we can go through. So we'll finish up with the general government departments that are left that we did not do on last Fridays. And then we will move into, we'll have a break, and then we'll move into the utility enterprise and ACDA from there. All right. So we, just a reminder that all of the budget documents are on OMB's homepage. And we've provided that web address for everybody's reference. And public transportation. So again, the departments we're going to see today, general government and utility enterprise, are mostly a continuation budget as we discussed last Friday. So you can see here is that the general obligation bond debt based on the schedules from public finance for previously approved bonds. Change of 17,000. The continuation level salary and benefit adjustments. You'll notice there is a large increase here for the paratransit service. This is a continuation level increase. This is the new cost of that contract. We had a contract with a previous vendor that did not have escalators in it for the term of that contract. And that contract ended. We were required to go out to bid for those services. And this is now the cost to continue those services. Fuel cost increase for the continuation level, and then for the 2023 proposed for public transportation, requesting a grant position, which would be funded with existing and new grants that the department was able to obtain. And I will open it up for questions.
Well, so the grant position, is this being added so that we can try to get as many grants as possible of the federal grant money that was created within the last year or so?
Through the chair, yes. So potentially part of the position that we're looking to fund here is going to be support and compliance, but also would bring the availability for us to potentially go after more funds as we have match available for them.
And so our match is usually 10%, is that correct, or it depends?
sorry, green light. So through the chair, the positions that this may be used with grant funds could be anywhere from 80% to 20%, or the 90-10 that we're used to seeing as well, depending on the funding source that's identified. There is some potential cost allocation planning that needs to be done for us to be able to use the grant funds. So there is a little bit of legwork in advance that needs to be done for that to be able to be utilized.
Okay, great. Any other questions from members of the committee on the transportation? Mr. Cont'd?
So it's kind of transportation. It's a little bit of a obtuse question, probably to the manager. I sent Adam an email yesterday inquiring about the interest of the administration if the assembly were to fund a contract for broad-based grant writing support, outreach, access for this period that we're in with the infrastructure dollars. And so it's something that I've been really thinking about that we might want to get ahead of broadly for the municipality, helping you guys to be able to target and go for funds that are available across departments. And so I support this because you're going to need that position anyways, but we're in a rare moment where there's the biggest infrastructure investment of our lifetime. And so we'll come to that conversation later, but I sent it off to Adam yesterday and I'm putting that on the table here now.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, first of all, I'd like to say that is not an obtuse question. It's very logical. And I would say you'll see, it, especially with transit, because so much of what they do is FTA funded, grant funded. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of benefit for them. But not only with the infrastructure bill, but we are finding with the ever-changing Treasury guidelines related to ARPA, we're seeing in not only the mayor's office with administering those grants, but we're seeing in finance and grant requirements and reporting requirements that are ever changing. The reality is to administer these grants that we're already receiving, in addition to chasing the new money that's out there, it is just, it really takes a skill set to do that. And you know, I do have concerns, and we have discussed them internally, that we may not have the adequate level of support in order to maximize those grant, you know, not only the grants we have and the reporting requirements that are changing, but maximize our ability to chase new money. So I think your question, your inquiry is frankly right on point.
Yeah, so then I'll be drafting an amendment. I'll probably share some thoughts on how it could be structured. I'm not so concerned about how it's structured per se, other than it's aggressively empowering us to chase and be successful and accountable in the opportunity in this moment. So,
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is feels like quite the increase for anchor rides. Can we talk a little bit about what's the current ridership utilization? What's driving the increase for that? Thanks.
Absolutely. So through the chair, the ridership for anchor rides at this point monthly is somewhere around 10,000 rides per month. That's seniors, people with disabilities, and ADA medical eligible participants. So the utilization is very high. The ridership did not necessarily drive the contract increase so much as the cost of doing day-to-day business for the contractor. You know, we did see things like fuel increases for the contractor. We saw labor increases, significant labor increases. The Teamsters went out and were very successful in their negotiations for the anchor rides contract. And we saw probably the most significant labor change there. And so that all trickled down into this cost that you're seeing today. This was a shock to us for sure. Okay. When we went out for RFP, as was mentioned, this previously was a 7-year contract. And so without any of those escalators in place, we really didn't have the true sense of what the cost of doing business was.
Do we ask our anchor rides provider to look at whether or not they could bill Medicaid for recoupment of some of their expenses?
Yes, they do bill Medicaid for some of the recoup of expenses.
So this is above and beyond what they can recoup from Medicaid?
Correct.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Altel. And we've been joined by Mr. Ballin and also Chair LaFrance, and I'll be passing off the gavel to her to run this meeting now. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Peterson. You could have kept it. Do members have any other questions? Okay, back to you all.
All right. And we will move on to public transportation capital. They have two projects requesting bond funds. And as you can see and discussed previously, they do match federal grants that with the expectation of receiving those. So if there's any questions on those requests.
Any questions?
All right. So we will move on to the CFO's office. Thank you, Public Transportation. And we will call up acting CFO Grant Utrinka. And what you can see is that, as seen before in previous departments, we reversed the one-time amendment for the $114,000 contribution for AEDC. And then we have continuation level salary and benefit adjustments, getting us to the continuation level. And then under the proposed, you'll see that we are proposing to add back the AEDC funding for that contribution to keep them whole. So for 2023, the proposal is to contribute the $254,000 in total that they received in 2022, and that includes the contributions that came from the utility enterprises. So that level would remain constant from 22 to 23.
And actually, I believe Mr. Rivera may have had a question about public transportation, public transit. Mr. Rivera, was that what you wanted to ask about?
Yes, Madam Chair. Apologies. I didn't get in my text quick enough. So yeah, my question is related to the new grant accountant position. As I understand it, part of their job is going to be compliance and part of their job is going to be looking for new grants. Let's assume that they are wildly successful and we successfully compete for new grants on the federal level. How are we budgeting for the required match for those new grants?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, those new grants are unknown at this time. Once we identify the grant, we have the grant writer on board, and we start identifying the grants. As the grants we submit for those grants, we will we go through a whole internal process of identifying, do we have available, or where could we find the matching funds if there's any matching funds required. All of that, once the grants are received, they go back before the assembly. So if there's a match, the department's required to identify the match at that time. But right now it would be conjectural for me to speculate because I have no idea what grants might be out there that we haven't contemplated yet.
Any follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I know this is all conjectural and theoretical, and so I appreciate that it's difficult to respond to. I guess the expectation, especially as we're looking at a lot of various departments possibly applying for grants, is the expectation that the match would come within the public transportation department?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Rivera, Jamie Acton is shaking her head yes at me right now. She heard her, she could feel that transit wasn't done yet. So she came back. But I would also say, we also have to remember that not always do all grants require monetary contribution. Sometimes the labor is allowable to be the match. So sometimes our staff's own labor can be quantified and that can be used as a match that's required for some grants. So that's why I just say it's really difficult without me seeing the grant and the specifications in each grant that we're applying for, how to answer that question. But do know that departments aren't applying for grants for millions of dollars that require millions of dollars to match without an identifiable funding source. Those are big discussions that are had before the grant's ever applied for.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Okay, back to the Chief Fiscal Officer.
So if there's any questions on this one, or if we're, I think we touched on all of these ones. So if no questions, we'll move on to the alcohol tax for the CFO, which is just the reflection of what we discussed last Friday on the health department slide for alcohol tax, where we're transitioning the Pay for Success program from the CFO to AHD because they are truly the ones that are administering this program. So this is just a reflection of the movement of that funding source from the CFO's office to AHD.
Go ahead, Ms. Zalatel.
So I'm trying to think through that. I get the substantively, the health department would have the pieces of this because this is permanent supportive housing, but just like in other this is a performance-based payout. I'm just trying to think through, I forget what it is. It's when boxes have to be checked in order for something to be paid, the CFO has done that in other instances. I'm thinking tax abatement maybe is what I'm thinking of. And so I see that there's a joint role there because I see why some is a substantive expert. There's a complicated finance mechanism attached to this one as well. So I'm a little bit concerned that we're putting a complex finance mechanism, program into the health department.
And Grant can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that he is signing off on these invoices at this time. I think it is AHD that is working with the United Way on this program. So I think originally the funding source with the pilot program was not the alcohol tax, and that was a different funding mechanism. And that's kind of how the CFO's office got involved in that piece. But
I don't think that's right. I think we're still in the performance-based payment program, and we're just using alcohol tax funds to make those performance-based payments.
Yep.
I have really big concerns about this, I think, because it was I remember sitting through multiple work sessions trying to make sure that we were squared away on how this funding mechanism would work. And it was wildly complex. So I have some significant reservations without some assurance that the CFO's office is going to remain involved in some capacity to ensure that this mechanism is carried out and that there is some oversight by finance beyond just the subject matter expertise with regard to the substance of the program.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Anyone else?
We can come up with a process, where we work with the CFO's office and AHD collectively to make sure that, there's oversight of those payments and that all of the performance metrics are being met.
So Grant Utrinka, acting CFO. I'm happy to look into the process and get back to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel.
All right. So now we will move on to the finance department. So what you'll notice here is that, again, we're reversing the one-time items that were added for CAMA training and documentation as we were still trying to set up the CAMA software system. And it is now implemented. And so what you'll see under debt service is now that we are in go live of the CAMA system, we are now paying off those debt requirements for that system. So that is the debt service for the CAMA. Then we have our continuation level salaries and benefits adjustments for the finance department. some non-labor cost increases, and then the fleet adjustment. And this is again the realignment of the cost of the fleet across all municipal departments. And there are no 2023 proposed changes for the finance department.
Any questions?
All right. And then this is the finance department's piece of the alcohol tax, and this is continuation of the tax enforcement officers that are responsible for collecting the alcohol tax.
Mr. Constant?
Thanks. Might be a question for a work session another day or a committee meeting, but how is the tax enforcement process going? Can the CFO kind of report on that, or is it going okay? Are we having trouble collecting?
I'll look into that. As far as I know, it's going well. I mean, it's an all electronic version. It's eliminated a lot of manpower, but I don't have a grasp right now on where they are.
Thanks, it'd be great.
Thank you. Anyone else?
All right. And we will move on to the purchasing department. And we have one line for them in the continuation level salary and benefit adjustments and no 2023 proposed changes.
Sorry about that.
No,
I
you're
have a question about FTE. And I see that the positions are at 13. That's the same number as last year, correct?
Correct. Yep. We're not proposing any changes.
And I also understand that the administration is preparing some data about personnel and positions. We talked about that. The meeting manager is nodding her head because I'm particularly curious about this department. I know that there have been some longtime personnel who have left, and I would like to get a better sense of where we are with any open positions there. So thank you.
Yep. I believe from last Friday's work session, we have the by department vacancies that we'll be submitting.
Thank you. Anyone else?
All right. Thank you, Grant. And we are moving on to the Human Resources Department. We have a continuation level salary and benefit adjustments for human resources, along with the reduction of the ML&P PERS liability. So this is the liability that the municipality holds in paying the PERS for those ML&P employees that were separated with the sale. So this is something that we will be seeing for quite a few years to come.
Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. I know that Human Resources has implemented an enhanced vetting process. Should there be a contract item, budget increase for that to continue into 23, that we would operationalize it for 23? Because I don't see any proposed budget changes here that suggests that that might be something, unless it's going to be absorbed into the current budget.
Through the chair, Assembly Member Zalatel, thank you for the question. HR is utilizing Pinnacle, which was a current contractor. There were modules within some of the different workflows that we have, whether it's through our onboarding, I can't remember, Beth, what it's called, but NeoGov process that we hadn't fully been utilizing. So you're not going to see a contract increase. I don't think it's necessary. We're just utilizing the tools that we have to their fullest capacity.
And does that take into account if we are really, really lucky and we are able to fill all the vacancies that the MOA has? Is there still enough capacity?
At this time, yes.
Okay, great. If that doesn't become the case, let us know.
We will. And I'll say part of it is because what you're seeing in employee relations, the employment section, what you're seeing is a process. If we fully utilize NeoGov, it creates a lot of workflow that is just way more streamlined and efficient and automated. So it's giving those employees that are doing the background checks and working with Pinnacle more time to do that rather than just processing paperwork, because the system is doing a lot of the paper shuffling for them, if you will.
Great. Maybe that's something after we get past this process later, we could get a little bit more briefing on, because it was of interest of like what we were utilizing. So if we could maybe have someone show us, that would be really fantastic.
Absolutely. And just to reaffirm, Jared Gerker, who is the deputy director, and he's the one that's overseeing the background and employment section and been really key in implementing these new changes. We have offered to do a work session to kind of walk the assembly through, what the old process was, where the deficiencies were, what the new process is. And through that conversation, Ron Kamahaley would also be part of that conversation, and he could explain to you more fully NeoGov, the application, and all those things. That might be something of interest for the body if you so choose.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Thank you, Ms. Domboski. We were joined by Ms. Allard at 11:30.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth and Ron. We will move on to management and budget. We are for OMB. We just have the continuation level salary and benefit adjustments. This also includes the full year cost of the position that was added in 2022. I am happy to report that one of our vacancies is filled, and we will have a new employee on Monday. And we are actively looking to fill that second position and be fully staffed, hopefully by the end of the year. So.
I think we may have gotten meetinged out yesterday.
Yeah.
We had like 6 hours or so straight, right? Anybody have any questions? Okay, we can keep moving.
All right. So we will move on to the municipal attorney, who is indisposed today in an arbitration. So hopefully we can do her justice and answer the questions that you guys may have. But we will start with the reversal of the one-time settlement items from 2022, the salary and benefit adjustments for the municipal attorney's office. Again, this is not a reduction in people or their salaries. This is just the natural movement between employees in and out, and those benefit changes. We're seeing an increased cost in our indigent defense contracts is reflected here, and then the fleet realignment through the municipality. For the proposed changes, you will see the increase or the transfer from building services. When we discussed this on last work session, you've seen the reduction on the building services side. So this is just the offsetting increase for the municipal attorney's department. And then you'll see in the 2023 proposed the pay alignment to retain and attract attorneys. And I think this is something that we have covered over the last week or so, in that we're seeing some attorneys choosing to be employed elsewhere, mostly the state, because of the pay disparities. And so this is an attempt for us to try to retain and attract those attorneys to come in.
Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. I asked and received from Blair or Ms. Christensen an attorney salary study, and I see the grades we use for attorneys and the minimum and maximum. So will this shift within the grades, the maximum available?
That'll have to be an evaluation through the human resources process, because the grades are not specific to the municipal attorney. They are specific to the type of position. And so it might be that some of those positions need to move to a different grade, and not necessarily the grade itself would increase. But that would be the holistic approach by human resources to review all of those positions and then adjust them accordingly where.
Okay. Because I would want to ensure that the investment made in the salary adjustments stick with the positions, not necessarily with the person, to make the positions more competitive. So if we have a municipal attorney to leave with, experience, that we have enough money within that grade to recruit, a similarly experienced attorney.
Yes, absolutely. And that's how the human resources approaches it. It's not for people, it's for positions.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Thank you.
Does the pay alignment bring the munis then salaries close to or equal to or about the same as the state? Do you know? Just want to understand if it makes us competitive.
That is our intent. So we did have a wage and hour do cost analysis, and that's what Assemblymember Zalatel is referring to. That is our intent. So when we were budgeting, we were in the process of the wage and hour study. So right now, what HR is doing is they're going back and evaluating the results of that and looking at the appropriation. So because that is our goal, is to bring us closer to the state, since the state is kind of the number one offender of attracting our staff. I'm trying to say it nicely.
It's called poaching.
That's the word that was on my mind, but I didn't say it.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. I'd like to revisit that at some point for APD as well, because I understand it's a similar situation as far as with the troopers, and the troopers just like recently adjusted upwards their pay scale as well. So thank you. Anybody else have questions? All right.
Okay, and then we will move to the municipal attorney's piece of the alcohol tax. And this is the continuation of one prosecutor and one clerk being paid for with the alcohol tax. And again, this is the continuation level labor changes for those positions.
He might still be upstairs with the mayor and the delegation from Chitose.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and skip the mayor's office for now. We are a bit ahead of schedule, and we will move on to equity and justice.
Madam Chair, I just
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mr.
just
Peterson.
have thought of a question here on the municipal attorney. So the one the one attorney that was transferred are they specializing in domestic violence? Is that the reason? I'm trying to remember how that all happened.
No, it's just a transfer of the position from building services to the transfer of the funding from building services to the municipal attorney's office to create a civil attorney position. So it's just, again, another effort for us to try to get some positions and funding in that department to attract attorneys.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Okay. And we're skipping the mayor's office, going to equity and justice. So what you will see here is the reversal of the one-time settlement in 2022 1Q. The continuation labor changes for the salaries and benefits inside of the equity and justice department. And then you'll notice that we are transferring the equity and justice officer and the associated non-labor from the alcohol tax into general government. So that's what you're seeing here is that movement. And I think that Assemblymember Zalatil put forward an amendment on your guys' last appropriation that's doing that effectively for 2022. And so this would be the continuation of that process where the equity and justice officer will be funded in general government and not in the alcohol tax.
Ms. Zalatil?
Thank you. So this will just be tax funded general, because right now it's community assistance. So it'll just be within.
Yep, it'll just be inside the general government.
Okay.
Yep.
And that will be that one position because the other, I guess it shows there's a total of 3 positions. I'm a little bit
because the
confused.
Office of Equal Opportunity is under the Office of Equity and Justice.
And that was already in general operating.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatil. And I believe, too, we'll be scheduling a work session soon with the Director of Equity and Justice, Chief Equity Officer. And I believe as well a report is pending. Any other questions? Okay, we can keep moving on.
All right. And then you'll see here is this is just the reflection of what we just discussed in the general government side is the reduction to the alcohol tax for that position moving into general government funded instead of alcohol tax funded.
Go ahead, Ms. Zalatel.
Thanks. This is a great opportunity to highlight that a couple of members and myself, Mr. Voland and Mr. Rivera, are bringing forward an item to reappropriate these alcohol tax dollars for one time for equity technical assistance for the alcohol tax here shortly. So we just wanted to, it's a great chance to talk about that and to make that connection for you all as to where that, and we did that in partnership with the health department. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel.
All right, and moving on to the Assembly's budget. And so we're reflecting the reversal of the one-time amendment for the Alaska Railroad claim of use along tracks, salary and benefit adjustments, continuation for the positions already funded inside of the Assembly, and then there are no proposed budget changes at this time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Actually, Ms. Camacho, would you speak a little bit more about the Assembly budget?
Yes. So the budget that the administration proposes does not match the submitted budget. It's short a little under 600,000. The 600,000 generally is labor for the new legislative and policy analyst, changing the associate ombudsman from part-time to full-time so that they will have 3 full-time staff in 2023, election workers, some funding. So legislative services actually has a budget to operate off of instead of, shoestring budget, which they've been making do with this year, and a couple other items, but that's generally a really broad overview.
Thank you, Ms. Camacho. Go ahead, Ms. Zalatel.
Can that be shared with members, the assembly branch operating budget that was submitted?
Yes. Anyone else? Okay, we're moving right along.
All right, and then for the alcohol tax piece, this is just the reversal of the one-time amendments that were added to the alcohol tax. And so that's.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and Equal Rights Commission. Just the salary and benefit continuation adjustments for those positions inside of the Equal Rights Commission, and no 2023 proposed budget changes. All right. I think, so we'll do internal audit and then we can come back to the mayor's office. Because, and then that'll end our general government. Did you?
He didn't respond.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, Adam's here.
okay. Yeah, we can go to the mayor. We'll go back to the mayor's office and then we can. So for the mayor's office, what you'll notice is the continuation salary and benefit adjustments, along with the continuation fleet adjustment. This is just the realignment again through the municipal departments. Restoring the labor for the time no longer charged to grant administration. the reallocation of the administration of the ARPA grants is going from the mayor's office to the municipal manager's office. So what you'll notice is that when we presented the municipal manager department, there was a reduction for the labor costs and a position there because they will be the ones administering those funds. And now these positions in the mayor's office will no longer be administering those. So I think that we discussed Portia Erickson's was the one that was administering them, and she is no longer working with the municipality. So we are moving those duties to another individual. And so now her position will be wholly funded in general government and not using grant funds for that purpose. And then the contract services increase for the mayor's office.
Ms. Zalatal?
Thanks. So will the contract with Ken Miller for the ARPA grants be moving over to the Muni Manager's office as well as those continue?
Not at this time. The contract is still ongoing at this time, but Lindsay Causer, who is in my office, she's working directly with Ken Miller.
So the idea is to end the contract services and just bring it all in-house? I guess I'm a little bit confused about the intersection of the two.
No, that's not the intent. The intent is so the services that are being provided by the contractor is really technical advice on grant report, the treasury requirements and the treasury reporting requirements. He's also the main person at this time that's working with all the grantees to get the package ready. And once he gets the grantees to a point where we can submit the package for legal review and for execution, then they come over to Lindsay and she executes and she follows up with those grantees. But all the technical reporting, all of that, Ken Miller is the one, that contractor right now is the one who's doing it. So the skill set and the treasury guidance has been changing so frequently. We do believe we need contract services to continue that. And in fact, some of the guidance that's coming out now is far more complicated. In that some of the grants that have been let, you actually have to go put eyes on it and see what they've done. So we're recognizing the guidance and the requirements that are coming out of Treasury are getting more and more onerous. So we do believe we're going to have to continue with a contractor. Obviously, that contract is due to expire here very soon. So whether it goes back out to a new contractor or there's a contract amendment, it'll come back to the assembly.
But that'll be out of your office. It's the municipal manager's office at that point.
Potentially. Right now, it's still in the mayor's office. We did not move that contractor. Even though they're two different offices, my staff is now working with Ken Miller in the mayor's office to effectuate it. So for us, whether he's coming out of the mayor's office or whether he's coming out of the manager's office, frankly, it doesn't really matter to me. The work is still getting done and we're still working with a contractor.
All of that is to premise. What's the $250,000 increase in contract services in the mayor's office?
Oh, we can go back to the mayor's office. I'll stop talking now. Thank you.
Thanks. I was just trying to understand that part first. Thanks.
Potential legal services.
That's not terrible. Potential legal services is really vague. Do you have any more you could share about that? I mean, like independent counsel, like.
Yes, if we needed to contract out to outside legal counsel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel.
Okay. I don't see Mr. Chadwick yet, but we will move along to internal audit. So what you'll notice, starting from the top, is that it's the reversal of a one-time change in the internal audit department. They had proposed leaving a position vacant for a period of time as a reduction in 2022. So this is adding back that full cost of that position. The salary and benefit continuation changes for those positions inside of internal audit, and then the fleet adjustments for the realignment across the municipal departments for internal audit. And no proposed budget changes at this time.
Any questions? know that being on the audit committee, we often talk about adding more and more audits. And the municipal manager's nodding her head as she's also on that committee. And I guess my question would be, are we creating any space for any potential third-party audits or assistance, contracting services provided by third parties, given that internal audit has a pretty long list that they need to do next year?
Just in time.
Texted you. So I will start, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, and then I'll give Mike a minute to catch his breath. So to your question of, does this budget reflect creating additional space for internal audit to do more audits, or do kind of their plan for the amount of audits that are coming? There is no adjustments that are being made in this current budget, nor are there requests for contractual services for them to be able to contract out with a third party. I would defer to Mr. Chadwick to be able to talk about their capacity, but this would be just a status quo continuation budget.
Through the chair, this budget, as far as I can understand, Ms. Dombrowski is correct. It does not add any additional staff, nor does it add any contractual services.
What is your existing capacity for contract services? Mostly just trying to get at, Mr. Chadwick, if you're going to be able to, I feel like we just keep adding more and more audits, and I don't know how you continue to do them all. I know there's some movement around. It's pretty remarkable, but just want to make sure too that given that we do keep adding more, that you have the resources you need.
Through the chair, in the past, we have done some audits where there's been some contractual services where we have been the contract administrator for those audits. For example, you may remember several years ago, there was an audit where Zig did some work with when the implementation of SAP, and he would come in on a monthly basis for several years, and we oversaw that audit. So on occasion, when funding is provided, we have gone out with an RFP to contract for services, and that's been helpful. Those are a lot of times those audits are audits where we do not have the technical expertise, or it may be require a lot of extra man hours, and so we contract for those services.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, just that name Zig, you brought back all those memories, and I just want to say Alden is such a better communicator. Thanks, Zig, but Alden, he was the gold.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chadwick.
Thank you
All
for
right.
your support.
So
Madam Chair?
before we get to our break,
Mr. Peterson?
We have Ms. Christensen here from the legal department, and she wasn't here when we were going over her budget, so maybe members might have questions since she's here now. Just throwing that out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Any questions for Ms. Christensen? Ms. Zalatel?
So thanks for the salary study. I really appreciated it. We talked a little bit about how the adjustment will go to the classification, to the position, not the person. A question I have for you is when I look at the state classifications, there are more options, there are more grades. Is that something that you might find advantageous for retaining or recruiting more experienced municipal attorneys?
Through the chair to Ms. Salatel, Blair Christensen, acting municipal attorney. So the state pays their attorneys substantially different than we do, right? All the attorneys are executives and they're on a range, and the state pays them. The state pays its attorneys like we pay our non-reps. It's a lockstep, and so they progress through the steps per year on your merit anniversary date. I mean, certainly that would have benefits to the municipal attorney's office because otherwise, I mean, I guess I think my personal opinion is that we are an odd department because we are really the only department that is full of executives, right? Most departments just have one executive or two executives that are the directors and the deputy directors, but the municipal attorney's office is basically all executives except for our staff. And so in the past, when administrations have decided not to give the raises to the execs, right, that's where we really start falling behind the state because we don't move in that way.
I guess the question's more like when I look at the minimum qualifications, so you have an attorney one, an attorney two, the deputy and the municipal, you don't have anything that covers any experience really over 4 years to recruit for. So if you have a 12-year attorney leave and you want someone with 6 or 8 years of experience, you're in a range that really starts by considering a 4-year. And so that was kind of where the question was coming from. Whereas if I look at the states, and I understand that stepwise approach, they have a couple that, contemplate a little bit that mid-level, that mid-range experience.
And through the chair, if I may, I agree. I think that is true. I think that I'm not alone in my opinion. I think other municipal attorneys and attorneys that work in the department believe that the civil division particularly takes quite a while in the municipality to get up to speed on, right? It's very complicated. There's a lot of different legal issues that we face. You have to be a specialist in many areas of law. And 4 years is really, like for us in the civil division, an attorney with 4 years of experience is not very useful to us. We need 10 years of experience, 20 years of experience. We get very lucky and get a lot of people who have served, have had practices or been at the state and already practiced 20 years. And so that is what we depend on and that kind of experience. And so I agree with you that a position that required more experience would be more helpful for the civil division.
Yeah, and I've been looking at it through the lens, like I guess I'm now considered a mid-career attorney. Would I find, a job description if posted saying you want a minimum of 4 years experience? Is that the kind of job, I would apply for?
Right.
And that seems not like what you're often looking for. So I appreciate the conversation about it. I hope we can find a way forward that not only lets us retain our super talented municipal attorneys, but when we have the opportunity to recruit, I feel sorry for any brand new young lawyer who has to come to this table and not only, represent the municipality, but then answer the question of 12 elected members. So
I agree.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatil. Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
I'm really surprised that we don't have a system more like the states that benefits longevity, particularly considering that every year they're here, they learn the nuances. And so they get more efficient at their job. They can put together whatever legislation you need quickly. They understand the complexities of the nature of the business and the uniqueness of our organization here. So that's surprising to me that it doesn't have something that has those anniversary date allocation and benefit improvements along the way. So interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Anyone else? I actually am curious, we just looked at the mayor's budget and there is money in there for legal counsel. And maybe this is more a question for Ms. Demboski. I would have thought that would be supplemental to the Department of Law budget rather than in the mayor's office.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Blair Christensen, acting municipal attorney. So I will tell you that as long as I've been at the municipality, the municipal attorney's office has always taken the position that the departments who initiate the litigation or whose employees are involved in litigation pay for the litigation, and that the municipal attorney's office does not pay for that litigation. I think we see it. I mean, it's not an actual conflict of interest, but we see it as the client should be the one driving the decisions on paying for litigation and all of those things. So, and I think that from our perspective, if we manage all the contracts for outside counsel. So if we manage the contracts and we're responsible for the funding, it puts too much of the ball, right, the power in our court. And so we've always taken the position that the departments who are responsible for the litigation bear those expenses.
Okay, understood. So a department that is anticipating starting litigation would include a certain amount then in their budget.
Well, I would say not just starting litigation, but maybe defending litigation. We can't predict. We don't know what we don't know, and whether we're talking about, you know, differences of interpretation between the two branches of government, or whether we're talking about some other issue that we can't predict in the future. I think that's the reason why the Department of Law is saying it's more appropriate to be in the mayor's office budget rather than their budget, because if litigation is going to come against the mayor's office, or if there's going to be an interpretation request, then it would be generated from the mayor's office. So it should be paid for out of the mayor's office.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Anybody else have questions? Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Yeah. I realize that none of us have like the 30-year history of the legal department, the law department. And I'm wondering if we can look back and figure out how these issues have been managed from a budgetary perspective in the past, in the context of a department anticipating potential legal issues and then budgeting for it. That seems kind of unusual. And so I would love to understand kind of the precedent of how that's been done from a budgeting perspective over the course of some years.
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, Blair Christensen. So I think that's an interesting question. Certainly some departments historically, we anticipate that they either have ongoing litigation that falls into the next fiscal year, like APD. We often have litigation involving APD, and they do budget for those legal expenses. We aren't often, in any sense, we are not often plaintiffs in litigation, which is how you really control or you foresee that litigation. And so I can look back through our records and I can look back through the contracts, but us being plaintiffs in litigation is, I don't want to say an anomaly, but it is certainly not our normal course of events, right? We're normally defendants.
I think that might get to the rub of where people are kind of wondering, what is this? Because we've had it just stated that anticipating questions for definition, separation of power. It's unusual to have it for being plaintiffs, asking for money effectively for being a plaintiff. It feels interesting and unusual, and I certainly would love some framing of how that's worked in the past.
Just to follow up through the chair, Mr. Constant, one of the best examples that Marilyn reminded me of, credit where credit is due. Think about the port and the Marad lawsuit, right? We knew we were going to engage, and the port housed those expenses in their budget. And that was a multi-year lawsuit that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the assembly budgeted for that, and they put that budget for those services in that department. So this is not unusual. This is just simply preparing, planning and budgeting for what may come. The way this is lined, can we go back to the mayor's office? It's contractual services. So I will say, I preluded to my comments about contract services increases, and I think it goes to the heart of what Assemblymember Zolotel was asking about was, the ARPA contractor requirements. We know those contractor requirements are going to be are likely going to continue into the next year. To be frank, it's probably going to be multi-years until you're done with those grant programs and those reporting requirements. And because of the intensity of the needs for those, that type of contract could also come out of this line item as well. It's housed in the mayor's office. It's there, whether it's for legal services or contractual services for grant reporting. I mean, that's how it's listed as contract services.
And so the chief of staff mentioned specifically legal services, and the idea of it, the issue of ARPA and support, that is non-controversial to me, but the idea of preloading an appropriation for legal services under contract that could be used to sue the assembly for separation of powers issues is, again, it's a very interesting idea to put that forward into the budget. Where the code is specific, it says if outside counsel is to be hired for the purposes of this, you need to come before the body to get an authorization. I don't want to set it up so that it's authorized in advance, right, where we short circuit something there and give anyone the sense that they have the authority to just begin, and not that we would ever not fund the administration to have its counsel if it came to a point where it wanted to ask the court for clarification on some issue. It's kind of weird. And that's where it's different than the other contracted services.
Right. And just in response through the chair, Mr. Constant, just to be clear, this is a budget document. This does not authorize legal services. The code's very clear, and I'm not the attorney, so I'll let her pontificate on that. But it is my understanding as a contract administrator, any contract for legal services over $30,000 has to be approved in advance by the assembly. Is that right? And so this, even though it says contract services, whatever those contracts are, whether it is for, some 4th of July event that happens and we contract, whether it's for a grant administrator or a grant reporter, or whether it's for legal contract services, we still have to file the code requirements, and you have to identify who the contractor is. You have to identify the amount, and based on what it's for and the amount, the code requires you go to the assembly for approval in a variety of instances. So by passing the budget with a line item in there that says contract services increase, I would defer to legal. But my understanding is that does not authorize the mayor to go hire an attorney to sue the assembly. That's not what this is.
And that's just following on what the comments were from the chief of staff. It definitely raises that specter. And this, maybe it's a time to discuss this, since Blair has previously and did mention how difficult it is to manage the conflicts that arise when you have multiple clients with different interests, and you're one person, and the bar, who's your real kind of who you have to make sure is not unhappy. And we have strong and long argued that the municipal attorney is the municipality's attorney representing both branches of the government, which puts the mayor in an interesting position, or any executive, because they seek counsel. And so from a philosophical perspective, I have wondered if there is authority for an additional attorney to be hired on the 7th floor who's a subordinate to the municipal attorney, who becomes the mayor's go-to person for these kinds of opinions and questions and analysis, that can provide bufferage for all the rest of the attorneys on the 7th floor, except for the municipal attorney, who still has to manage the tangle of all of those issues, but is a supervisor of that individual. And so if the intent is to effectively come up with counsel to the mayor for any number of issues over time, just someone who's on a retainer, I can call you, you can come over, we can talk, who isn't conflicted in all of those things, it might also be possible to have an additional attorney on the 7th floor fulfill that role. And so it's just something I've been thinking about a lot, because I think it is a fair argument that the mayor should want to be able to have some free conversation that doesn't kind of implode the interactions with all the other people all the time, dominoes falling down because you flip one. And so that's a conversation that I think we should come up with an approach to that systematically addresses that conflict, as opposed to the idea it's possible to go either way. I guess the executive decision, hire someone outside or do it inside.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, Blair Christensen. It's an interesting question. Certainly, as you said, the municipal attorney's office represents the municipality as a whole. And so there are times at which we're advising the assembly and also advising the administration. And we do, build walls and keep people separate, to keep attorneys from talking to each other, from looking, we lock down our time matters so that you can't look across the matters and all those things, right? We have all those things in place. I think theoretically you could have an assistant municipal attorney that advises the mayor on something that somebody else in the office is advising the assembly on. I think that when you get into litigation and lawsuits, it becomes more complicated, because there is a bar rule that says that we're not supposed to sue our own clients. And that regardless of whether it's me or whether it's another assistant municipal attorney, and right now it's me because I'm the municipal attorney or the acting municipal attorney's name is at the bottom of all pleadings. And so we run into that complication. So litigation is different than advice. And whether you could build those walls to give advice, I think is one thing. Whether you could build those walls for litigation, I think is something separate.
Thank you. That's helpful info.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Next is Mr. Peterson, then Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we were talking about the port litigation, and as I recall, we hired outside counsel, but you also had members from the municipal attorney's office as part of that team, and we were very successful. And I just happened to think we haven't got that. There's an appeal going on. Do you have any information, any updates you could give us on that, since we're ahead of schedule right now?
The port?
Yeah, I don't think we haven't received that.
They're here. So,
Through-
yeah, they're here.
The
We haven't
port's
got
here,
that
but
big check
Bob
yet.
Owens has been the municipal attorney's office attorney that is working with our outside counsel on the port litigation. And it is my understanding that Myriad has appealed the decision in the port litigation, and we have not received a decision on that.
Actually,
Certainly.
I talked to Bob yesterday, and what he said was, or 2 days ago, that they haven't even filed the record. They've asked for an extension of time for their first filing. And so they're doing exactly what you think they would do, which is pushing off
Delay.
as far and as long as they possibly can. And so I asked that very question when Bob was here, because that's the red meat question. So,
And I don't want to give any extra latitude to the federal government, but that is a massive record. I mean, terabytes and terabytes of information. It really is a massive record. But I mean, obviously, we hope that resolves itself soon.
same attorneys.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Zalatel?
Thanks. So I think I have a follow-up question. I know Adam is gone, so I'll just hand it off to the municipal manager. What were the contractual services for the mayor's office this in 22? So this be a good comparative number. And then the piece, I think Mr. Peterson somewhat just alluded to it, that if litigation is contemplated, usually we are briefed in an executive session prior to even seeing a contract. Of course, if that litigation is going to be between the branches of government, that would be different. But and I guess I'm kind of stuck, and just so you know, with those contractual services, because it's a large amount in a line item that isn't very specific. And Mr. Trombley said legal services. If we know that part of that is going to be used for the ARPA administration, maybe some of those contractual services should go to the municipal manager's office or something, so that we have a better idea of what we're actually talking about with regard to the divide on that, because it is a large amount of money for, a 2-word answer.
I have never been held to a 2-word answer, so I'll try. Through the chair, Assemblymember Zalatel. I don't have the mayor's, breakdown in front of me. I can certainly get you a substantive list of what was actually contracted in 2022, so you can see. Off the top of my head, I can think of 2 major expenses that were coming out of contractual services for the mayor's office. One was Larry Baker's pay, because Larry Baker is a contractor. He's not technically a municipal employee filling in a PCN like I do. The other was for ARPA administration. I think Ken Miller's contract. Is that right, Courtney? Ken Miller's contract, I think, is out of the contractual services, or was he just grant? Oh, that's right. The other one that Courtney's reminding me of, not Ken Miller, scratch that. The other one was the lobbyist contract. So Legislative Consultants LLC, I think last year, if memory serves, the initial contract that the Assembly approved was for $80,000. So just between those two, I think Mr. Baker, I think his contract is about $60,000 in total. I think it was a $30,000 and then it was extended. Is that right? And something like that. It was like originally 30,000. So if you were to take those 2 expenditures together, I mean, you're already at $140,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that is a substantial portion of contractual services.
I appreciate the longer explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Any other questions? So we're about 20 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yep. And so we have made it to our break. If we want to take 15 minutes, we have notified the utility enterprise that we're starting early. So they are prepared to show up and have their.
No, I'm fine.
Word is here.
Well, if you have everyone here you need for the port. Yeah, the schedule, like Ms. Zalatel said, has been published. And so I don't know. No, it hasn't. So it hasn't been published. Okay. It's just here.
This is an internal document presented by the administration.
Do you have everyone here for the port? Yeah, we can. Are you amenable to that, Courtney?
Yeah. We can sure ask them to join us. Oh, we did. Yep. I'm guessing they're doing circles around the parking lot trying to find somewhere to.
Anywhere you want. Yep.
I would have thought you would want to take your break so you can face us on a full stomach. I don't have an opinion.
Okay, so we are moving on to the utility enterprise and ACDA. Again, just a reminder that all of the budgets are on the OMB homepage at this link. And for the port, again, we requested from the utility enterprise as well that we maintain a continuation level budget. So that is what you're seeing here from the port. You'll notice the charges by other departments. Those are the IGC charges. Additionally, the reduction of the MISA calculation. We have interest on bonded debt. Again, as we move through the PAMP project and we have those funding sources identified, you'll notice the ins and outs of the debt requirement that we have for anything that is not paid for upfront as far as grant funding or another source that doesn't require debt repayment. The salaries and benefits adjustment continuation level for the employees at the port. And we do not have any 2023 proposed changes for the port at this time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I just want to note too, for members of the public who are following along, that we've moved to enterprise and utilities, which are not funded out of general government. That's a question that comes up a lot at community councils.
And I would note.
Go ahead,
that
Mr. Cont'd.
Somebody must have seen it coming because in the packets, the port comes before hydropower. So we're exactly where we're supposed to be. What happened with the MISA? Why did it go down?
It went down because the mill rate went down.
Okay, thank you, because all the assessments went up. Okay, or the appraisals went up, the values. Thanks. Is that consistent across the departments?
I don't, it depends, because even though the mill rate might go down, it depends on what some of their net plant values do as well. So
Right.
it's the formula. So some of them might show a reduction, but some of them might also show an increase. It just depends on how the formula calculates out.
And there might be a slight decrease to that number before the end of the year because we have not booked the PCT yet.
Right, and
And
we
when
shouldn't until it's pumping, right?
I'm sorry?
Do we book it, or do we evaluate it once it opens, or basically once construction is done? How
Well,
does that
yeah,
work?
once we hit that magic point with that they call beneficial occupancy.
Okay.
And basically the keys get turned over to us and we're waiting for a piece of paper that officially states that. Then we can book it. But remember, we don't book the whole thing. We only book that portion of it that was not grant money funded. And I think they call that contributed, the contributed amount is excluded out. Yeah. But there will be something to acknowledge the fact that we now own this new facility.
Thank you.
Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. I actually have two questions. It took me a minute to get to the port revenue and expenses detail. So I see an increase of 8% in dock revenue in the coming year. What funds dock revenue? Because the tariff isn't recommended to be changed. So what's the difference
No.
between the two?
No, there really isn't one. Dock revenue is what we call dockage and wharfage. Dockage is what we charge vessels to park at the dock. And it's there's a table in the tariff that's based on the length of time that they're going to be there and the length of the vessel. It's just go in there, Chinese menu, go in there, find your number, and that's what you pay on a daily basis. That's one part of it. The other part of it is wharfage, which is also laid out in the tariff. It is the cents on the dollar associated with the types of commodities you're bringing across the dock. It's either containers, linear feet, barrels, gallons, those kinds of things. That is how we generate dock revenue.
So there is a proposed increase in those coming for 23
Oh, yeah.
in the tariff.
Yes, and because when you approved the 2020 tariff change, you approved 10 years worth of annual increases.
Okay, so it's an annualized increase
Yes.
from 2020 forward. Okay.
Yes.
And then I noticed there's no increase to contractual services, which are at $6.1 million. So as we ramp up on the port work, the port
Modernization.
thank you. We're good. We have enough capacity for as fast as we might need to go, want to go.
Well, that's different pot of money. These
Different pot of
yeah,
money.
these
Okay.
contractual services are those for the existing port.
So where do I find the pot of money for the improvement program?
Well, that'll be, some of it will be in where the debt service charges is, because that's how we'll pay for it when we, when we incur any associated debt. And that will be in the PAMP line as a charge against the modernization program, and that has its own account code.
It's what we will get to next in their capital. The PAMP is the capital program.
It's a capital program.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we'll show the capital projects that they have outlined for next year in the next slide. So the port modernization is one of their capital projects, and that's where that funding comes from, is in that capital.
Okay, so that's my mistake. So I didn't realize from design all the way through is the capital
It's
expenditure.
all capital expenditure, yes.
Oh, it's like a transportation project. Okay, got it.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, Amy Domboski had mentioned yesterday, I believe it was, that the municipality had received an abnormally high number of OSHA complaints and fines, and that we have to be prepared for higher insurance requirements, et cetera. Do you mind speaking to the port safety program and how we're reporting any OSHA incidents, anything that might jeopardize that part of the budget?
No, that's a really good question. We think we have a pretty impressive safety program down there at the port. There has not been there's been one port related employee incident lately during a maintenance operation. The guy was pretty badly injured. But that was the first time in my 15 years there that we've had an issue with a safety related problem that required us to call OSHA to bring OSHA down to the port. Now, OSHA spends a lot of time on the port, not only with us, but with the users. In fact, they spent the better part of yesterday at Matson's facility doing an unannounced inspection with them. And we get our fair share of those. Do we get write-ups out of that? Yeah, we do. Do we get some that we think are unfair under the circumstances? We do, and we've engaged with the municipal attorney's office to handle those, because OSHA, and you probably know this, if they're going to fine you, it's going to look ugly, and but you get an opportunity to go back and counter, and it tends never to be the fine you pay if you have to pay a fine at all. We've been pretty fortunate so far of not having to pay any fines, not talking our way out of it, but explaining to whoever the inspector was that which they didn't see that mitigates the situation. And a couple of times we've had to make some minor modifications to handrails and other parts of the infrastructure to accommodate an OSHA recommendation. And we can do that virtually on a spot. And those write-ups tend to go away. You know, we take it seriously. You know, it's real easy. You know, there's too many moving parts on a ship day for you not to be paying attention to what you're doing. And we credit the port users with incredibly excellent safety programs. And I have a safety guy that I think every other department in the city wants. He's great and worth whatever I pay him.
All right, excellent. That's good to know. And just word to warning, the word amongst the contractors is OSHA is really cranking it up. So I'm not surprised they were down there yesterday doing a surprise inspection.
Well, I will tell you,
place,
OSHA was barely a word I heard for the longest time. And I hear it every month now. So yeah, they're, I don't know whether they need the revenue or what the story is, but they are out there in force. I couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Constant?
Thank you, Steve. Just on the page 19, the detailed port budget, there's, and I know you've answered this before, but there's new members. There is a persistent operating loss, net income loss.
Yes.
And so would you just,
every year,
right, share with folks why that is so it's clear?
Sure. The port is what's called a non-regulated utility, which means that we don't have a FERC, we don't have an RCA that we have to run our rate structure by. So we can set the rate structure the way we want to cover all of our costs, which we do, but not make an exorbitant amount of extra money. What we also, by municipal policy, have been relieved of having to worry about is funding depreciation. So it's a accounting mathematical problem. If you subtract out that big negative or you take away that big negative for depreciation, then we're always in the black. Yeah, but when you do the accounting, the way accounting principles require you to do, and you factor in depreciation, then you see that big negative number every year, which is why, you know, last time we spoke, and I'm an advocate for, but this is something we'd have to come to the assembly for through the administration, because it's a policy change that maybe it's time for the port to start funding depreciation. You know, while it makes us look really good, it means we don't set the rates at a place where every time we have a big program like we've got going now, you know, that would prevent us from having to sit around a room going, well, where the heck's the money going to come from to do this? If we funded depreciation, we would have that pot to replace the infrastructure down there at the port. So it's one of those double-edged swords. You know, either way, we're going to have to do something to the rates to cover what that future cost is going to be. Do we do it now, or do we agonize over how we're going to do it when the time comes to do it? So you know, it's worth the conversation. I can tell you where I fall on it, and I will bet you that the new CFO falls on the same side of the line as I do.
Yeah, and you know what that looks like is 25 years of agony, not. Yeah, it's not 2 years of agony, and so I wonder if we could be presented with a modeling of what it would look like if we did it all at once, if we did it over time.
Yeah.
How maybe buffer the shock, if you would.
No, and that's fair. And what I think the time is right, because we're right in the middle of the modernization program. So we have to do something to the rates anyway in order to cover the cost of that, which we're doing now in the near term. Mm-hmm. But taking that long view really doesn't mean we have to do it all at once. You know, we're going to get brand new infrastructure that isn't going to need any kind of requirement. If we're building a 70-year port, we're a long way from having to dip into that pot.
So that's an interesting point. Would it be legal to establish a policy that depreciation on new port infrastructure starts at year 10 or something? You know, like for houses, when you buy a house, you get a couple of years for your tax reporting that depreciation doesn't account. So I wonder if there's a rational timeline which would soften the buffer of making the change today. You're going to have a lot less objection because you're going to point to the tariff and say, well, look, nothing changed.
I bet you there's not a rule.
Okay.
Because we're a non-regulated utility. So I'll bet you there's not a rule. I think it's what we say it will be. Am I wrong?
It's policy. It'll be policy.
Yeah, it'll be a policy call that the municipality sets.
So one last question. If we do that, do you think we will suddenly have a chorus of objections coming to us from certain parties?
Absolutely. Anytime you tinker with the rates at the port, right, wrong, or indifferent,
Right.
it's an opportunity to say something.
Right, it's a business
Yeah.
opportunity. Okay.
No. We've been fairly successful up to this point, unfortunately. And the reason why we're having these conversations now has nothing to do with the fact that there's a surcharge. Because everybody understands the need for it. What everybody doesn't understand or want to accept is that you got to put a how you're going to do it in place. And there's a difference of opinion on the how you're going to do it. And we've not quite reconciled that yet. It's not quite time to take a stand yet. There's still enough time to kind of flesh out as much as we can. And we talked about that the other day. We're talking about charging for construction of a facility we haven't even designed yet. And everybody is assuming that the design is going to be kind of what they think it's going to be. And we've put nothing, there's nothing to base a total construction cost number on yet. So you don't know you don't know what you're going to build. How do you know what it's going to cost you? Why should why are you wasting all our time assuming you think you know what it's going to cost you and causing all of this angst? But I'll stop pontificating now.
Anyone else? I have a question about personnel.
Sure.
Since we've talked about it in a number of other departments, I mean, what is your situation with staffing? Are you also experiencing difficulty retaining, attracting folks?
Oh gosh, lucky me. Everybody loves to work at the port. Everybody wants to work at the port. If we had the kind of turnover that some other departments have, we'd have a revolving door. But I got to tell you, a lot of the staff is pretty static. I've got maintenance guys that have been there 30 years. They started at the port, they'll retire at the port, and which is good for us because they love what they're doing. And I'd like to think we take good care of them. We've had some turnover of late, but we've never grown the size of the staff. We really haven't had to. When you're the landlord and you're not running the cargo dock operations, you have the luxury of right sizing your staff to do what maintenance, what the landlord does. Keeps the lights on, keeps the power on, keeps the plumbing working, keeps the roads clean and safe to drive. I mean, that's our job. We let the private sector do commerce, and we sit there and we maintain a facility so it's functional and usable. And it just doesn't take 1,000 people to do that, especially on this port. And with the fact that we're not busy every day, we've got plenty of time to clean up after everybody's operations if and when we have to. So 21, 22 people is probably the right size. And it'll probably be the right size even with a brand new place where the level of maintenance, at least at the beginning, won't be all that great. But Mother Nature's still going to snow on us, and storm drains are still going to collapse, and grass is still going to need cutting. So there'll be that part of it that our maintenance guys can handle. And there's not a lot of them. There's only 13, and they work 3 shifts. So I'm convinced we're right sized, and knock wood, so far we haven't had trouble filling vacancies.
That's great to hear.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the fact that you have low turnover probably is a reflection of why you have so few claims of injuries and workman comp problems. Because if you have somebody that's been there for 30 years, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're not going to put themselves in a position where they're going to hurt themselves and have an injury. So, very often anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that probably is a reflection in that. So, thank you.
Yeah, my joke is we have a better workman's comp record than the library. What's up with that?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Pretty heavy, yeah.
Everybody's talking about potential injuries in the library.
Yeah. All right, and we will move on to the port capital projects. I think we have discussed at least the largest one here, which is the port modernization project. You'll notice there is a $400 million state line there, which is reflective of the ask that will be made to continue to fund this project. And then we have some, I believe, mostly annual programs through the port from their equity funded.
Ms. Alatel?
Okay, so I know that $65 million has been authorized for the port to borrow. We just haven't pulled the trigger on it yet.
Haven't had to.
Haven't had to. I know it's possibly contemplated to do in 23. Why isn't that reflected in here? Because it would be capital debt because it's for port modernization.
It's already approved, and so these are forward looking into 23. So not the pulling of the trigger is already.
But it's not incurred.
No, and here's here's how it works. I think we come to you twice. We come to you the first time for approval to incur debt up to X, which you approve. Then when it comes time to sell bonds to a specific amount, hopefully great, less than that which you've allowed us to borrow, we come back to you again to approve the bond purchase.
Sure, but I guess where I'm stuck is the 400 million of state grants is very speculative because we don't know what the state will do in the next legislative session. What we know is that to incur the debt up to that $65 million, like that projected debt, I would think would be somehow reflected here because although was authorized, I think in 22, it doesn't exist yet because we're not carrying it on the books because it hasn't happened.
So this is the plan into 2023. And so in 2022, what you've seen is that number and those figures. So in 2022, what you've seen is the ask from the state at that point, and this is an additional one, not one that we've already had. So
Got that.
this is forward looking, not the money that we have, which is the 65. So although we haven't pulled the trigger on it, we already have the authorization for that. This would be all of the new authorization of funds. So the equity projects and everything, that would be the 2023 authorization of that funding. And so we've already come in forward with the 65 million and had that. And so when they pull the trigger, that's when you would see the actual documents, but it's already been included in their capital budget from a prior year.
Okay. I think I understand that. I think the $400 million figure, just because we're talking about the budget right now, is ambitious and maybe a little pie in the sky. So I'll be looking forward to that discussion during our legislative program.
Go ahead, Kevin.
My understanding was that you received a grant earlier from the IRA grants. I don't know if that was perhaps not. I thought that part of what the state had funded as far as a grant had come from IRA, which is the Infrastructure Rehabilitation Reinvestment Act through 2026 is about 1.8 trillion. And I'm curious on the storm drain enhancements and things like that are specifically targeted for federal infrastructure. I mean, they deal specifically with drainage, culverts, drain enhancements. I know that the municipality was talking about bringing on a grant writer for transportation in order to help this. And Mr. Cont'd talked about broadening their scope. Are we currently working with a grant writer or someone to
we are
tap into this manna from heaven the federal government seems to be bestowing upon infrastructure projects?
We've had we're on the third year of a 3-year contract with Moffitt and Nickel, who helps us do our grant writing. The focus has been on the big dollars for the modernization program, as you could well imagine, but they also will help us write grants for smaller programs that we've been just as successful in getting grant dollars for. But I will admit, I didn't know there was a grant program for storm drains because we've never gone there.
Okay, well, they exist. I'd be interested if they issue reports on what they're applying for, what that looks for, and kind of what they're hoping.
Yeah, Moffitt Nickel.
Moffitt Nickel. All right, thank you.
You bet.
I think Pete Buttigieg just did a TikTok about storm drain grants. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
That was Mr. Volan. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Any other questions? We've got a side conversation going on here about storm drains.
They're the new bane of our existence is storm drains. They're as old as the port, and they're starting to remind us that they're there. Not in a good way.
Mr. Constant?
Wouldn't a systematic approach to addressing storm drains in the municipality be a really great option?
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right.
All right. Thank you for the report.
Okay.
Thank you all.
We are technically on time now if we want to take our break, or unless we want to just kind of keep going through the departments and we can.
Do we have lunch here? Okay, lunch is here, so yes, we'll go ahead and take our break.
All right.
Thanks.